All right. Bueno, bienvenidos de nuevo al tercer día del Simposio de Humanidades Digitales Globales 2025 y vamos a dar paso al último panel del día, que no del simposio. Como vengo recordando, nuestros compañeros en Michigan se reunirán el lunes y el martes de nuevo en persona para continuar la conversación y el resto la podemos ver en retransmisión en vivo. Y ahora sí doy paso a Michael, Sinatra y el panel constituido por los panelistas principales o ponentes principales del simposio virtual eh, para que cierren la sesión. Michael, adelante.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. I will be addressing everybody in English. You don't want to hear what my Spanish sounds like. It's a great pleasure to be here. I want to thank all the organizers of Global DH and in particular Kristen, who's my co-chair at Centernet. So we are partners in crime with other hats, and obviously I'm looking forward also to the Centernet sponsored lecture on Monday with Jimena. We continue with lots of our friends and colleagues from the Global South. And so as a follow-up to the two very stimulating and thought-provoking lectures that people were able to see live or like myself recording yesterday, I thought I would start the conversation first with our speakers, and then later on we'll open it up to people obviously in the Zoom room with us today, to try to think about a few aspects that I thought were nicely kind of dovetailing between the two talks. And so my first questions to the three of you would be sort of related to the idea that both of the networks that you've described, emerge from genuine grassroots efforts to legitimize digital humanities work within a very particular national academic system. And so I was wondering whether you wanted to elaborate a bit, each of you navigated institutional recognition and also the way that informal infrastructure have played in scaling up digital humanities activity within your region. So maybe Miriam, Ernesto to begin with, and then Menno, you can sort of pick up the ball.
Well, we start the network by thinking that it's an open invitation for everybody who want to join us. So we don't establish a definition of digital humanities as a starting point. We think that the people that is working in digital humanities can identify themselves with the concept and the way in which we are working. So we start from there. And I think that we face originally the problem of recognition because, of course, we were a small group. We were working on a field that has not recognition on the institution, and the authorities in the institution has never heard of digital humanities. So we think that the path to follow was, on one hand, continue with this generation of link with people that want to work with us and make a network and have a conversation on digital humanities. And from there, try to generate enough products and events that at some point attract the attention of the authorities. And in fact, we succeed, more or less, by be there when the authorities want to talk about digital humanities. I feel that was our way, but I don't know, Miriam.
Yeah, I mean, when we started with all of this, I just finished my PhD and came back to Mexico to do my postdoctoral with Ernesto and within the Facultad of Philosophy and Letters. So we managed to sneak digital humanities into the title of some classes, like history and digital humanities, literature and digital humanities, philosophy and digital. So like digital humanities was the last name. Like, we were very sneaky in that way because you cannot offer like a digital humanities class, even for grad students. So it has to be like a little bit sneaky. We were mixed with the TICs, the communication and information technologies. We were associated. Okay, you work with computers, so you know how to use the Google or PowerPoint. So it was a challenge to say like, no, we do use this automatic devices and things, and we do use software, but we are not this part. So it was persistency. Like, okay, we managed to be sneaky enough that and we didn't leave it. We just again and again and again. And if you close this class, then we use another class, and then we go from philosophy to history to literature to. So we were like in a lot of things, like very very sneaky. And finally, it was like, okay, there is something that is digital humanities. It makes sense. Oh, there is this group of people working on digital humanities. So why don't we call them? Because they've been working on it for like 7, 8 years. Maybe they know what we were talking about. So that's why how finally we gained recognition, like from universities and institutional kind of level.
Oh, that's great to hear. Menno, at your end?
Yeah, yeah, I'm muted now. I unmuted the button and I saw my mute, but my mute icon was still there. So it's actually quite interesting to hear what you've done, and I have to say that it made me think about what happened here in South Africa, and I realized I wasn't really there at the beginning. So I only came in a little bit later. DASA, the Digital Humanities Association of Southern Africa, was already there. The SADiLaR, the South African Center for Digital Language Resources, was also already there. So in a way, everything was in place, but it doesn't mean that everything is, working and accepted. And so I think the structures were there, but it doesn't. I mean, the real work still needs to happen. And I really like your work, your approach, Ernesto and Miriam, by kind of slowly incorporating it into a curriculum, for example. And I think that's really the way to do it. People need to know about it and then realize, wait a minute, this is interesting, or wait a minute, this is what I'm already doing. I want to be involved. I think in my situation, my personal situation, DASA exists, but a lot of people don't know about it. It's still a very small group. I think we need to be more active. We're trying, but we need to get more people in. At the same time, I'm not really part of a university. I'm part of a research infrastructure. So I don't have the opportunities of just kind of adding DH to a course, for example. And I think that is actually a limiting factor. What I realize is that there are young people who might be interested in digital humanities, but if they can't find a supervisor who also supports this, then so this is more on the supervision side of things, then it becomes difficult, right? So if a young researcher says, I want to do something with, with computers and humanities, and then the supervisor says, no, let's, just take a more traditional approach, and then it's not. There are no new people coming in that want to do digital. I mean, they might want to do it, but they don't have the experience. They're kind of stuck in a more traditional way. And I think that's a bit of a limiting factor. So I'm trying to do this, but it's only just me. I think that there are people in South Africa that are now seeing, wait a minute, this is actually quite interesting, but then where do I really start? So I think in that sense, in South Africa, the situation is a little bit different. I hope that we can get it off the ground. So in a way, the good thing is that like I said, the structures are there. So people have done the hard groundwork. DASA is there. DASA is part of EDO. This is kind of internationally recognized. South African government recognizes that this might be a very interesting field, even though they might not fully know what it is because it's still so new in South Africa. But they're willing to support this, which I very much appreciate. So I think in that sense, the structures are there, but now getting the people to be active, I think that's the that's the challenge.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting point, and as you know, this is part of, I think, the gist behind and the collaboration that Centenet wanted to have this year with Global DH, because it's another way to also think about how the layer of structures of centers are another facets, sort of working in tandem with associations, with university initiative, and then places where centers sometimes are more prominent for a range of reasons, some of them being institutional, and sometimes, and that will be the segue to my next question, sometimes language becomes an issue where, people have a different way of engaging with a topic if it seems to be too predominantly, Anglo-centric. I was involved in the early days of Humanistica back in 2012 when we funded the Association of Francophone Studies. And that was the idea that though there is a little pocket in Quebec, in Canada, where I am, zooming from today, there was a sort of that sense of the fractured, and where language could be a different way to sort of think about some of that. And so I was wondering whether in both of your cases, that idea of, if not challenging English as much as, putting forward ways to support linguistic inclusion and multilingual practices, as we're having today, because I know that there are wonderful people doing live translation right now, but how do we use these tools? How we try to also engage with DH at the topic, through that specificity, which can be a hindrance on some level with that domination of English, or on the contrary, an extra motivation for people to get involved. So maybe how do you see, and maybe I'll go to Ernesto first, before Miriam, or Miriam again this time, just to vary, choose.
You want to start, Miriam?
I mean, we did have a need for projects and articles and papers and books in Spanish, mainly because at undergraduate level, most of the students know how to read English, but we were interested in going to the undergrad level. And there is you cannot force them to know how to read English. And most of the literature is still now it's in English. So we are really interested in publish and create resources in Spanish, mainly because it's our first language for Latin America, except for Brazil and a couple of places, but specifically for the region. Most of us speak Spanish, English. I mean, most of us can read and even write in English. I mean, I did my PhD in Canada, so I know how to speak English with a Canadian accent. But we have this this need for also, and I think it's also like a resistance kind of thing. Like we want to write in Spanish, like we want to do our projects in Spanish. We want to be recognized in Spanish. We have a journal in Spanish. So it's also like this. We are part of this world where the language when we are talking is English, but we do have another languages that we are more fluent. Like you don't know how smart I'm in English, in Spanish. Like, so it's this need to like this. We want to do this. But we still like communicate and do translations and work in Spanish. We are also trying to reach to Portuguese speakers, for example, maybe French speakers, like because Latin America has more than Spanish, and I think can do that slowly, but we have a limitation as Ernesto and I mentioned in our talk with native languages. We mainly work in Spanish, but we don't work in other native languages from Mexico. It's very hard to reach these communities because they're mainly activists, not academics, and we're still in the academia, not engaged with the activists. I mean, you know them, you know of them, you participate if you can, but it's kind of complicated to incorporate other languages rather than Spanish, and then you have to incorporate English. It's been a difficult road talking about languages.
Let me add that I think it's an ethical issue that draws because Spanish is a dominant language too. Because I think maybe there are more Hispanic speakers than English speakers in the world, but the English is the dominant language in communication in general, but Spanish is a dominant language. So we need to face the issue that we have indigenous languages, and so we face the resistance to use only English because we think Spanish is a very rich language, and our objects of study are in Spanish, and the way we work in the community is in Spanish. So, but we need to have this new, how to say, we need to approach the issue to incorporate other languages, native languages in our community. There are a few academics that work with mostly Nahuatl, but there are few. We need to find more people, not only in the academia, but outside the academia, and that thing is an issue. We need to be, we have these two faces. We are resistant to the English in a way, but we are dominant in Spanish in a way. So it's a difficult position for us.
That's quite interesting. I've been thinking while you were talking, and I'm really a bit of an outsider in South Africa. I'm not South African. I'm originally from the Netherlands, and the language situation in South Africa is I think quite challenging. And I'm very afraid that I'm stepping on people's toes if I make a very strong statement here, because there are so strong feelings about these languages. I've got some ideas about this as well, and I know there are other South Africans in the room here. So I might get some comments later as well. So South Africa has 12 official languages, 11 that are spoken, sign language is one of them. They're official languages, but they're not equally supported in a way. I think they should be. At the same time, I'm not sure if that means that all of them necessarily need to be academic languages. I think that's a separate discussion. But what I see, so from my European Dutch background, we had a number of compulsory subjects in high school, for example. We had French, German, English, and Dutch then as subject in high school. And these are not, so apart from Dutch, these are not official languages in the Netherlands. And I see my children that go to school here, they essentially only get two languages. And these are the main languages, Afrikaans and English. Main languages in the sense of more people speak them, and that might be that because they're taught at schools. So at home, that distribution is quite different. So in the academic setting or in the educational setting, there's quite a distance from what's spoken at home, and I think that is, to me, that's a bit strange. But okay, I don't want to make too strong statements here because then I might get into trouble. But I think the issue, if people don't get educated in their home language, say from primary school level, high school level, and then all of a sudden they need to speak isiZulu at university, that simply doesn't work, right? You don't have the terminology for certain things. So essentially that's setting people up for failure. And I know that people are trying, so it's not that it doesn't happen. I know there are theses written in other languages than English in South Africa. So it's not that it's completely impossible, but I think the whole setup of the educational system at this moment makes it just very challenging. Another thing, and this is why I find this so difficult. So you mentioned this as well. So English at the moment is the kind of common language, at least in academia. That used to be perhaps German, it used to be Latin at some point in time. So, I mean, okay, we need to go back a little bit in time, but at the moment, the fact that we're speaking English, it's not my first language, it's not your first language, but it allows us to communicate in a relatively easy way. We're not perfect, we make mistakes, but we understand each other. And that is something that I like, and it doesn't necessarily have to be English. It just happens to be English at the moment. But what if everybody now starts publishing really in their own language? It actually makes it very difficult for me to access the information that's there. So on the one hand, I would like it if people can do this, but at the same time, we're kind of limiting ourselves by how do we get this information? Who knows if machine translation gets good enough that we can actually do this? Or perhaps even if, for example, just abstracts are translated. So at least I get the idea of what is in an article or the idea of what's in a book. Then I can still decide, do I want to get this translated or do I do something that allows me access? I think that is perhaps the way we need to go. But I think it's a difficult thing. We want to have access to the information. At the same time, we want to make it easy for ourselves. We want to express in our own language. I think these are just conflicting views of the same thing. I don't really know how to resolve that. And I think I was actually thinking of Mexico. I realize I don't know too much about Mexico. Like Spanish is the language, but then again, there are probably more languages spoken in Mexico. So how far do we go? If we want to use machine translation, that means we need to have tools for all of these languages. Can we do that? Can we do that now? Is that something we need to develop? How do we tackle this? I don't really know. I don't really know.
Well, I'll add that everybody at ADO is very curious because our colleagues from Korea who won the bid for DH 2026, one of the pitch, and Menno was in the room, so he knows that, but was actually trying to use the latest AI development in their conference center to try and have like live translations in 14 different languages is what they're currently talking about. And so it's obviously fascinating for everybody with the interest both in multiculturalism, linguistic diversity, but also to enter that Star Trek moment of, addressing people with little, earpieces and having, that kind of exchange done. We're all, waiting to see what it's going to be like, but technology does move fast, and it's quite, in particular, I mean, also Menno was just mentioning that idea of broadening that, and here in Quebec, for us, obviously, we've seen the decline with French publications. So there's the resurgence to say, you can still go ahead and publish in French because nowadays the machine will still be harvesting your article and do a translation of your abstract and push it in the results. So that kind of Anglo lingua franca for, scientific output is being sort of challenged. And I know that Portugal also has done some work at the governmental level to motivate people to do that, and quite a few countries are also trying to sort of play that card. And maybe that sort of falls into the other question that I had for you based on your conversation. It's also thinking about issues of sustainability, and we're thinking about early career researchers, as Miriam pointed out, being invested with like a postdoc and then a full-time academic career and others, but also how there is a quite a wide-ranging discrepancy between resources available at different institutions, and so how sometimes effort like summer schools or regional workshop that you've mentioned, obviously DH 2018 in Mexico was like a big splash. I know you don't have 1,000 people every other week in Mexico, descending to do that sort of things, but maybe in some ways how these the kind of training aspect is also another feature that you've mentioned respectively in your talks, and maybe sort of trying to address again this as the key component, or how do you see that working? So maybe we'll start with Menno this time to reverse the order.
Yeah, I realize again I've been in South Africa for 6 years, but I still feel like I'm new here. This country is pretty big, so I'm used to a small country like the Netherlands that's like 200 by 100 kilometers, and here this is actually quite a difference. So even if you organize something locally in South Africa, that might actually mean that the event is 1,200 kilometers further down the road. And so the distance is perhaps not necessarily the problem, but that means that there are also costs involved. Getting to the other side of the country actually it can be pretty expensive. And South Africa is not necessarily the richest country, where everybody can just pay for flights and accommodation and whatever. So we've been playing with different things. We've been trying to do things online. Also during COVID, we couldn't really get out of the house anyway. But that's not exactly the same as doing this in person. So we're trying different things. We've organized events that we call regional. So at least that people don't have to travel right to the other side of the country, trying to resolve that a little bit. But I think that remains challenging. And this is even within South Africa, right? I'm not even talking about going, for example, to Europe, to the US, or to Australia, or to another place. These costs are amazing. Yeah, I think that remains a challenge. So I very much like online learning as well, but again, it's not exactly the same as being with somebody in the same room where you can just sit down, point to the screen, write something on paper. It's not exactly the same. So we've been trying different things, but I don't feel that we found the sweet spot there. So I'm not sure exactly how you do this, for example, in Mexico, if you did find something that really works. I mean, I'd love to hear, and not just in Mexico, by the way. If there's somebody else who has the solution, then look, please share.
Well, Mexico is a big country too, but we are very centralized. So in Mexico City is where the big universities and the big institutions are. So part of the problem is how we can reach people outside Mexico City, because the first years we work mostly with people based in Mexico City, in at the UNAM, and curiously, I was thinking that our first step was not to teach students, but to teach professors. So Miriam has a lot of experience teaching professors digital tools, but also digital humanities. So I think that was a very important step to later can go with the students and teach students, because they start to know something from their professors. But now the challenge is how we reach the people outside Mexico City. We create this summer school. It's a week online, and is working. We need to elaborate a little bit more. It's online, and we need to elaborate a little more the pedagogy and the goals of the summer school. But we reach people not only from Mexico but from Latin America in general, and has been a good sneak to the way we could follow. But Miriam.
And we're also trying to do we have a conference every 2 years from the Red, and we've been a while since it has been done in Mexico City. From the pandemic, it has to be online. It was hosted for a university not in Mexico City, in Querétaro. It's nearby, but it's like 4 hours drive distance. Then we have another one in San Luis Potosí, organized by the university in that state and the National Anthropology Archaeology Institute. Can't translate that. And then this year is going to be held with another university up north, like in the right at the border. So maybe the best thing we've been doing is try not to centralize the Red HD, like collaborate with different universities within the country. So at least every 2 years, we have a moving session in different parts of the country. And this year, for example, it's going to be hybrid because we are collaborating with a university that has much more money than the National University. So it could be hybrid. So people don't have to travel all the way up north because it's also far away from the from north to south. It's like quite a distance. But I think we've succeeded with these initiatives like the Semana HD, the summer school, and then the conference being in different parts of the country, and also this teaching the teachers and not only the students, because most of us, especially the younger teachers, move around, don't stay in Mexico City, go to different universities in different parts of the country to start their academic career. So they have been spreading the digital humanities where they ended up working.
Yeah. So
Let
with
me add.
respect to, sorry, go ahead.
I want to add something that if you see, we are moving north, but not south. That is a problem here too.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say, so we also have a conference every other year. I would really like to get that to every year, just to have a more regular get together. But the challenge is that somebody will need to organize it. So the DASA will help support, and I've been trying to be involved with the last, was it 3 conferences? But we need local organizers to get this done. And for that, we need to have people that understand what digital humanities can be, that are willing to organize something like this. I think we're getting there, right? So this is not really a complaint. I think we're getting there. What I would love to see, and I think you're trying to get that as well, is that if we have, for example, 10 universities that say, yeah, we want to do this now and then, that means that if you organize it every year, only once every 10 years you need to organize a conference. That I hope is not too much of an effort. And this is only with 10 universities. I think there are 27 universities in South Africa. So that every 27 years you will need to organize a conference. Look, I mean, if you can't get that organized, then anyway, so we're not at that point, but I hope that we can get something like that where there's like a list where everybody can just organize it once every while, and that will lower the burden, and then we can get really things going.
Oh, that's really fascinating to hear, and in some ways, obviously, one of the underlining, sort of topic that also comes forth with trying to make this, organization and planning and reaching out. There's the idea of the funding challenges that all of you face in different level. So conscious of time before we sort of open it to the floor and see whether people have sort of questions, but maybe I would like to hear you, sort of come back or elaborate or, sort of see whether some of that. And I'm during the workshop I'm currently doing here, I've got several American colleagues who yesterday live got emails about their NEH being, cut of grants that they had already been awarded, like halfway through a grant with the current political institution changing, so that the topic is always on our mind, but sometimes the one who are lucky enough to get a big grant, we feel happy for them and at least they can carry that. But that was an instance of, again, a governmental change. So it's not so much for obviously turning this into a political discussion as much as the reality of how do we try to work through some places it's student based. If you get students, you can get money, you can do things. Sometimes it's only external funding. Some associations have been good at raising money through a range of ways, and therefore their association driven activities are through the money that they get. So I was just wondering again about how, because even sometimes things like using a platform, what do we with volunteers? Do we have people doing social media, for free, or do we pay grad students to sort of do that? So how do you see a bit of that, kind of, funding challenges, for your respective initiative?
Well, let me, I feel that we work like a guerrilla in Mexico because there is not much funding. There is not much infrastructure. So we try to find the ways to work without funding. That's the reality. When it's funding, we are really, really happy to use it and to create great projects. But we start at the basis that we probably only have some support from the university, from our institution, and that's it. So, it's the way in which we work is thinking how we can do things without money, and then try to find money to do more. But we have only, in my experience, we have only two ways to find funding in Mexico. One is your institution. In the case of the UNAM, the UNAM have a funding program, and you participate on, and the now Secretary of Science and Humanities and something like that is also giving money. So that is the only two ways to find money. It's very difficult to find money for private funding. So we try to work like that.
I think we're perhaps a little bit more lucky. So on the one hand, Sudler is a government-funded organization. We can hand out a little bit of money for funding conferences, for example, and we do that. So just to be clear, these are not huge amounts, right? It's really a little bit of funding so conferences can get something small off the ground. So far, we've been relatively lucky as well to get some additional funding from other organizations. But at the same time, I always wanted to keep the costs for a conference as low as possible. For example, to allow students who might not have their own funding to go somewhere if they need to travel, to pay for their own registration because their university is not paying for it, to access this as well. So I always want to, or I'm trying to run these conferences on a really low budget. Try to keep the cost low, make as much use of opportunities that are there. So if we can make use of university rooms, if we can get them for free, I mean, you get projectors for free, stuff like that. University has internet access, so you don't have to pay for that. Try to keep it on a very low budget, simply to keep it as accessible as possible. I think that is so I don't want it to be like a cheap conference in like, the rooms are falling apart and stuff like that. But I want to keep it as accessible as possible. And there will be some cost involved. And people see that, but it's different if you have to pay something. Okay, now we need to come up with, say, a currency that we all understand. Let's pick US dollars. If it's different from paying $100 versus $1,000 if you want to go to a conference. And then I would aim for the low amount if we can, just to keep it accessible.
Yeah, we do the same. Like for the people that's part of the Red HD has like I think this is gonna be the next one like $50. If you're not part of the organization, then it's like $70. But most of the students who have a paper, we are exempt of paying for the registration. So and we manage every conference. We try to have some money from the payment of the conference to maybe a grant, like a bus ticket to the conference, wipe out the fees for the registration and things like that, especially for early scholars and students. So and it's been working. And this time that is going to be hybrid, like there is not going to be need for physically move from one place to another. It's a different experience, but at least most people are going to be able to participate if they can't travel to the north of the country.
Yeah, and I quickly want to add, so even the membership of DASA is kept as low as possible. I mean, it needs to be workable, but we want that to be as accessible as possible as well. So this is really about access. Yeah.
Well, thanks for the three of you, and we've got about 15 minutes left for our, sort of concluding panel. So I'm going to invite, and I don't know how, Jen wants to run that, whether we use the hand raised or what would be the best looking at my co-host colleague on the call, or whether people should just put their question in the chat. Jennifer or Kate?
For the session, we can continue to use the format we've done in the past where folks can raise hands to voice a question aloud, put them in the chat. I will also relay any questions that come through on the live stream.
So to everyone, yeah, wonderful. Merv, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Marva, and I think I met like all of the keynote speakers earlier. So I have a question about I really respect what you were saying, Miriam, about like bringing in scholarship that happens in English in other languages into Spanish and into into teaching in Mexico and Latin America more broadly. But what about trying to bring what is happening in Mexico, in Latin America more broadly, or in other places to actually the professional settings of North America, right? Like, and in many ways, I'm a PhD student at Stanford, so I don't have a very, like, I don't have a permanent status. But on top of that, what I'm really interested in is actually being able to teach through languages that are not well represented and bringing it to students, to scholars more broadly, because I think in language conducted in DH research conducted in a language other than English actually adds something to DH more broadly that can't just be covered by the translation of it. So there's a learning that happens in these languages and research in these languages that we need to bring in to how we define DH. And so yeah, like I was just wondering if you had any sort of insights of like anyone if you had any insights about how to bring that in and how to sort of like account for the fact that this needs to be a part of the discussion abroad as much as like the dissemination of knowledge in either direction. Yeah.
Well, I think we are, as we mentioned in our talk, Ernesto and I, we are used to be translated and to translate ourselves. So because it's a common practice, it's something that we are just part of the exercise of digital humanities. However, we are used to be translated into languages from Spanish to English and vice versa. Mainly because also, I mean, I don't speak any other language or any of the indigenous languages in Mexico, so it should be impossible for me to translate myself to any other language. Could be really interesting, for example, if we were able to create like a laboratory or an exercise with native languages, with indigenous languages, because also the cosmology and the way of thinking in every language change the way you do things. So it should be really interesting, like a very interesting exercise to incorporate any other language and do digital humanities from these languages, because I am certain we have a lot of things to learn, because the way you think in your native language is different than the way you think in another language that is also your second or your third. So maybe it will be really interesting in learning how to learn in another cosmology that is not Occidental, that it's like indigenous way of thinking. But I mean, if you have any solution or any proposal to work with this, I will be really open to hear that.
Perhaps I can quickly add. So here in South Africa, like I said, so I think the educational system is not set up at the moment to learn in a language. So doing that at university feels very forced. We've done some research recently to look at what people want. Do they want at university level? Do they want to be taught in their own language, in their home language? And most of the students said, no, they would actually prefer to do this in English. And that's not because English is better or anything, but that's just because they're used to doing this. What they would like is additional support, for example, for terminology, so that the terminology that they don't really understand, to have that available in their own language. So that's perhaps kind of a bit of an in-between setting. So English, I mean, they're fluent enough in English, or at least they feel that they're fluent enough in English, but sometimes they want to get a better sense of what does this concept really mean, and then look that up in their own language. So I very much like your question, Merve. Something else that triggered, I'm not sure if that really was meant to be your question, but the way you asked it, I was like, wait a minute, so one of the things that we're asked to do is not to have research just in South Africa, and just so the research, for example, on South African languages only remains within South Africa. And we were told we need to try and make an impact on a global scale. So what we've been trying to do is organize, for example, workshops at international conferences that specifically deal with, for example, African languages. So what we get there is we get Africans or people from South Africa or people from Africa to participate in these international conferences, learn what's happening at the international conferences, but at the same time present their work in the context of these international conferences, what they normally might not have done, because they feel it's most relevant to people in South Africa or people in Africa. So essentially moving part of that discussion to the international stage. I personally really like it. So one of the advantages, if you co-organize it with a big conference, a lot of the organizational stuff is arranged by that big conference, or registration, payment, etc. That's already, you don't have to do that. You can focus on the academic aspect. I'm really not sure if that was part of your question, but the way you asked it, it kind of triggered in my head at least.
If I may, it was a little bit, but I'm really more thinking about like when I look at sort of like, preparing materials for the job market, which is like where I'm at in my academic stage. I'm like, like preparing a syllabus for a digital humanities course. And it's always stuff from North America, right? Like it's whenever we're citing stuff, it's published here, it's written by people here, it's cited by people here widely in other syllabi. But how is it that we can actually sort of, why is the default example project of a DH research should be coming out of like mapping California, right? Like sort of, or like any, but why couldn't it be like coming out of like, mapping a place in Mexico City, and I like the sort of like urban history of that. Like, so it's more like how can we imagine a way in which we teach DH, or we teach more broadly sort of introduction to digital methods, and not just like teaching like you said, like Menno, like South Africa being relevant for South Africa only. That's not the case at all. I learned so much from like Sadilar, from like your research, from like the network. And like how do we bring that learning in places where that might not be available to people because they're limited in English. They don't read Spanish. Like, how are they going to read like all of the stuff that's happening? I mean, I don't read Spanish either, unfortunately, but I read like many other languages that are my research languages. That's my first language. But how do we bring that in a way that is sort of like finding equal footing in, like, for better or worse, North America being the center of the production of digital humanities research more broadly?
I think it's partially a marketing issue. Do we market our research well enough? I'm not sure if that's everything, but I mean, if people can't see our work, then how can they know about our work?
Yeah, and I add that it's for me it's a very big problem, but I think translation is the way. We try once translation effort from for papers in Spanish into the English, but then we realized how difficult it is to publish in English a paper translated from Spanish, so because something that is in my mind through all this panel is why we think translation is bad. Because I think translation is the best tool we have to understand each other. So yeah, I think we need to think about how to translate more languages into other languages, not only into English. I think for instance, if you want to translate French papers into Spanish or Spanish paper into Italian or into Dutch, because I think it could help a little bit to break some walls.
Yeah. So we actually published, so PhD students of mine did essentially all of the work. We published a book where all the chapters were available in English and in Spanish. So these are people from Colombia. They wrote in Spanish and that was translated to English. My Spanish is essentially non-existent, so I wrote this in English and it was translated in Spanish. And the nice thing is, if you have some language experience, I could identify some mistake in Spanish, not grammatical mistakes because I have no clue, but sometimes I realize, okay, you're picking this word, but I really wonder if that is what I'm trying to say because it doesn't feel good, but I don't know for certain. So I can ask somebody who can then help. So every chapter was available in two languages. And I thought in the beginning, why are we doing this? But when I saw the result, I'm like, this is actually extremely cool. It makes it so much more accessible.
Yeah.
And I also think these kind of meetings help. Like, I know people from this country that speaks this language, so maybe we can talk a little bit, and I can invite you to my classroom to teach a class, maybe on Zoom, maybe on another platform. So my students know that there is people working in South Africa in exactly the same topic they are interested in working the dissertation. So maybe this and I can work as a translator of what's going on. So not a professional like an interpreter, but good enough. So we can manage to have people from Brazil, from France, from China, from Korea present in our classrooms, in our curriculum in this kind of way, like recording because of the time difference, or like an invitation, a small talk, like 15 minutes talk in a normal classroom setting where you explain your job, your work, and where Michael explains their research, so we can start these networks of real communication and not wait until the paper it's published and then it's translated. Maybe that's a way we can work a little bit and in getting to in showing or showcasing, maybe it's the word, our work in like around the world in different zones and areas of expertise. Could work.
I'd love that. I'd love that.
Another questions and comments as we're getting to the end of our session. I know some of you have been already watching things on Zoom all morning. We had the hand being raised. Ernesto, yeah.
Okay, one for Menno. I really want to know how you work with Slack. You pay for it? The people is engaged in Slack? How that work? Sorry, it's very technical, but
yeah. So setting up a Slack environment, I'm not sure exactly what you call that, can be free, but it has some limitations. So all their messages get deleted automatically. If you want to keep that, you have to pay, but it's actually pretty expensive if you want to have a big community on there. So we're not using a paid version.
okay.
I personally really like it. So I'm a member of, I think, about 12 Slack environments. And within each of these environments, you have a number of channels. So I personally like it. It's part of my day-to-day job. When I log into my computer, Slack automatically starts and I keep track of that. But I think there are a lot of people that are not used to using Slack. So you don't open it up automatically. You don't look there regularly enough. And then it becomes challenging. But I personally really like it can be almost direct. You can have direct conversations, but it also stays there. So it works a little bit like email as well. I don't always have to look at email nonstop. So I personally really like it. But it has to become part of your kind of work environment.
Yeah.
And I think in South Africa, at least, it's for most people, it's not really part of that yet. And I don't know exactly how to get people to make it part of their regular kind of work environment. I'm not sure if I can get that. What I hope is that by sharing useful information there, that at some point people will say, "Oh yeah, I got it from Slack," and people are like, "Oh, wait a minute, so stuff is happening on Slack. I can find the information there." That's what I hope. Um, Perhaps it's yeah, perhaps it remains a hope, but I would like to have a space where we can easily share information. I think that's the important part. Another option might be a mailing list, but here people are also not so used to mailing lists, it seems. So yeah, I think in South Africa at least, the informal network is very important. People just share stuff among each other. There's no more structured approach. I'm not sure what that's like in Mexico, though.
We rely mostly in social media, but we have a complaint from a professor that we don't use email list. So
Yeah.
If I can just jump in with my ADO hat, being president for a few more months, you can also benefit from running a Mattermost instance for free, which is a Slack equivalent with no limitation as far as time is concerned. Only files like attachment after a year get deleted in the free version. But even that we could look into. Simon Wiles, our infrastructure chair, is really wonderful that way. And there's also mailing list that can be set up through the ADO server provided, so that you could also be like Canadian Association just did that a few months ago to join in and use that list. Santanet has been using it for quite a few years already. But I know sometimes people don't realize that there are like free services that, I mean, nothing is free. We're paying for it at the ADO level,
of
but
course.
because it's available
Yeah.
and some constituent organization are using it, Simon is always very reactive. I mean, I literally, like, when we asked him to have a Mattermost instance at the beginning of a meeting, within the hour, he said it's up and running. So, like you won't need to wait for 3 months to have that. And it's very similar to Slack. I used Slack for years before switching to Mattermost, but as a matter of principle, we are very keen on open source and non-proprietary system. So not just paying for it, but also that Slack is a private company, whereas you can run Mattermost on your own server. And that's what ADO does, and would be happy to do that. That. And Jennifer mentioning the discount, I think it has. But when ADO looked for it, because we used to be on Slack, it was still an investment of money that we were kind of, is it worth the money versus giving another bursary for a travel bursary, even if it's quote unquote just $500 a year for the size of the organization. We wanted to give that for a travel bursary and switch to a free and in principle not for profit. But maybe that brings me to something I should sort of remind all our constituent organization about the services that Simon has, like his magic on that aspect.
Yeah. Can I know that we're running out of time as well, but all of a sudden we're moving to a very practical thing. How do we do this? What is your experience with this? I would love it if we can have another meeting at some point where we actually just get together and think about how do we practically run our organizations, or how do we practically reach out to people, or how do we practically fill in the gaps. I realize only now, like I think we're not doing that well enough. I mean, it's wonderful to hear how it works in Mexico, and I'm quite willing to share how we're doing things in South Africa. Doesn't mean we're doing it perfectly, but hearing about somebody else saying, "Oh, we can do this," like, wait a minute, we can also do this. I think that would actually be great.
That sounds really good.
Very good idea.
I would love to be part of something like that.
Well, that's a really wonderful ideas, and yes, we will invite lots of people. I see people reacting in the chat. So on that positive note, I want to thank again our 3 plenary speakers. It was like for your talk this week, it was just really, and everybody who hasn't had a chance to see it and are watching now live, the videos obviously will be available. I mean, I watched them last night because I had a private access, obviously, thanks to Kristen, but I know they will be made available like everything else in that wonderfully open Global DH Symposium. And I'll turn the floor back to Jennifer as a kind of word of closing, farewell, thanks, next step on Monday for people who, are going to be in person or watching Jimena, live. So, Jennifer? No, yeah.
Ok.
No,
Muchas
Marina.
gracias, Michael. Gracias a todos, Miriam, Menno, Ernesto, por este gran panel discutiendo muchas cosas importantes. Bueno, dar las gracias a todos por este maravilloso día. Antes de irnos, Kate va a dar una información, unos datos sobre el simposio virtual. Cuando quieras, Kate.